Ready?
Sure.
Okay. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Getting to WordPress. Today our speaker is Stephanie Leary, correct? Right? Stephanie is a full-time WordPress consultant. Prior to striking out on her own, she worked for several entities at Texas A&M and continues to consult for Texas A&M and other institutions of higher education. She's pretty active in the web design community, mostly in CSS standards, accessibility, WordPress, and higher ed. And her third book, Content Strategy for WordPress, was released in April of 2015.
Thank you.
Stephanie, enjoy.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to talk about how to get into WordPress when you are coming with baggage from your previous relationship with some other CMS. And everybody in here has my sympathies. This is not fun. Moving sucks. There's really nothing that you can do to make it not suck. But we can make it so that when you do get moved in, all of your content is there and you don't have weird character issues. You don't have your content cut off at every special character. Can you tell that these things have happened to me before? You probably have seen on the codex that there is a very long list of import plugins for WordPress, and it's not just the list of like 10 importers that you see under the tools screen. There's actually a ton of other plugins on the repository. There are tools that are not hosted on WordPress.org, and all of them are listed here on the codex wiki. The quality varies. It might end up looking a little like this when you're trying to move your stuff from one thing to another. And a lot of them aren't updated regularly, and I'm guilty of this too. I wrote a Gallery 2 importer like 8 years ago for, a specific purpose to get stuff out, and I released it because why not? Somebody else might find it useful, and I still get support requests for it. Can you update this? Like, no, I don't work for that group anymore. I don't have Gallery anymore. Sorry. Like, it's open source. Take it, update it, have fun with that. So a lot of people do what I do. They make a tool to get from one place to another and hopefully, release it into the wild in the hopes that someone else will use it, but then they don't update it because they don't need to, because now they're in WordPress and they're no longer using that thing that they imported from. Which is all to say that the quality of the stuff that you'll find on that wiki page really varies wildly. There are some official tools that are maintained by the other CMSs, but they may not get a lot of attention. And then there are, fly-by-night scripts that you'll install that maybe you shouldn't give access to your database. So really check the reviews, Google to see if anybody has had problems with the tool that you're using before you use it. And if there isn't something that's appropriate for your previous CMS, or you find that the one that is there is either too outdated or is full of security holes or is not something you want to use, then I'm going to give you a couple of alternatives today to get stuff out of almost any database or HTML site without having to rely on random importers or third-party import services. There's a couple of these that I've tried to work with. In fact, on the last one, we got all the way to the contract stage and then found out that because our project was federally funded, we couldn't hire a company that was based in Ukraine. And nothing on their website said they were based in Ukraine. And so it wasn't until they wrote the contract and tried to send an invoice that we went, oh, we can't pay you. Whoops. So we didn't get very far. But there are services out there that will basically install their bridge plugin on your server and go from whatever old CMS you have to whatever new CMS you're trying to go to. And I can't vouch for them because, like I said, federally funded projects couldn't hire them. Does anybody have any experience with these services? No? They're out there. Google, read reviews, and if you're comfortable using them, great. If not, you got this. You can import anything. And I mean anything. I've done photos from Gallery 2 into WordPress galleries. I've done tweets from Twitter into WordPress status posts. I've done really, really random product listings for a vet med diagnostic laboratory that sells its diagnostic tests to veterinarians from a weird hodgepodge combination of databases that ended up in a large Excel spreadsheet. And we got that into WordPress as posts with custom post types and custom fields, and it works great. And I'm going to show you how. So if you're coming from a nice, tidy database, it's actually a lot easier to get stuff into WordPress. And the tool that you're going to want to look at is called WP All Import. It will accept either an XML file or CSV. My experience with it is mostly with CSV files, because that's really easy to get from a tech person who isn't really a very qualified tech person, but can probably save out of access. They can usually save to CSV. This is also great if you have an existing SQL query that will get you a view that you like, and that's what you want to export. Save it out of there into CSV and come through this. So you'll upload a file, and it gives you this gorgeous drag and drop interface to say, hey, what columns from your CSV file go where in WordPress? And you literally just grab the blue heading and drag it into the appropriate field. So you find your title over here, and here's my post date. All of these are custom fields, and I'll go down the screen. And you literally just drag and drop into what looks like a sort of pseudo WordPress editing screen. And that's how you're telling it where to import what.
Can that be a custom post type?
Yes. One of the things that you'll get on the very first screen, and I can't do this live because we had to switch computers at the last minute, but it will ask you, what are you importing to? Is it posts, any of the custom post types that you already have registered, pages? It'll do images, and you have a lot of options with images. You can download them if they're given fully qualified URLs and import those into the media library. You can use images that are currently in the media library. You can put your images in a specific file place and get them from there. You can search through the media library for existing images before importing any, so you don't get duplicates. You can set the first image to be the featured image. You can do all kinds of stuff. And then you can do custom fields, which for this project was outstanding. We had about a zillion attributes for these diagnostic tests that had to come into custom fields. And you just drag as you go. And if you're using advanced custom fields to set this up, it has an integration for that and can detect your automatic custom field names and sort of pre-populate this list for you. So you don't have to type in all your field keys. Where it gets really brilliant, as far as I'm concerned, is the taxonomy section. So you can check off the taxonomies that you want included when you import, and then say, okay, each of my columns has multiple terms for this taxonomy, and I'm going to separate them by semicolons because in my imported data, some of my terms contained commas, which will get stripped out, but I got to separate them with something else so that it doesn't split those into two terms by accident. And I'm going to come back to this when we talk a little bit about how to transform data after it's been imported. Other options, you can either set everything to publish or draft, or you can say there's a field in my file that says whether it's published, draft, future, scheduled, all of that stuff. And as you export from your other CMS, you might have to fiddle with that data a little bit. When I exported a bunch of stuff out of Drupal, we were using the data view export module, I think is the name, which is fantastic and gives you a bunch of options for how you're outputting your CSV file. If the field should include HTML, you can do that. If it shouldn't, if it should strip HTML out, you can tell it that. If it is a date, you can specify exactly how the date is formatted, which is great because then you need a specific format when you're coming into WordPress. And for the Drupal publish, unpublish flags, it normally just exports yes or no for whether it's published, but you can override those labels. And so I was able to set the labels to publish or draft, which is what WordPress expects. That's WP All Import. Once you finish that, you just set go, and it churns through your files. Let's see, we did 6 or 7 separate import files for about 9,000 records in my Drupal site. And it took, I would say, about 4 hours just to get everything uploaded and churned through. And that was with some checking and so forth. So 9,000 pages. There's also a user import module for that, and we used that on 10,000 users. So we got the whole site, like there was a lot of setup, a lot of prep, a lot of setting the Drupal exports. But once we had everything ready to go, half a day we were in WordPress. It's great. If you are coming from static files, you might be here because I wrote this handy little thing called HTML import. So back in the day, like many of you, I was given a site for my higher ed employer that had about 10,000 pages that were managed in Dreamweaver based on Dreamweaver templates. There were only 2 templates, so it really was easy. And there was a style sheet, so everything was beautifully modular and everything, but it was still static files that we were FTPing up to the server. And I was tasked with figuring out how we were going to get all this into a CMS. And I said, I'm not copying 10,000 pages. Nor am I going to submit my student workers to copy 10,000 pages. I'm going to write something that's going to do this. And I had already been through the experience of copying pages or sites that had about 100 pages into WordPress. And that was like 20 hours of my life that I'll never get back. And so I was like, there's got to be an easier way. I know that PHP can read a directory of files, and I know that PHP has an XML parser that can read well-formed HTML, assuming that you haven't screwed it up too badly. So what I'm going to do is write a plugin that's going to loop through the whole directory of HTML files. I'm going to give it my old URL and file extensions that it should include and directories that it should totally ignore. And I'm going to tell it where my content is in that file and have the XML parser extract that. And so this works really well if you have something like an ID that you can give it that's specific to the portion of the HTML file that you want it to pull out into the WordPress poster page. This is not going to work like CSS selectors or jQuery selectors. Whatever you put in the attribute has to match exactly what's between the quotes on that attribute. So if you have something that has like 3 classes with spaces in between them, put all 3 classes in that attribute field, and or in the value field, I'm sorry, and use class as your attribute. I'm hoping to rewrite this to use PHP query, which will make it a little bit more familiar. But for now, the value has to be completely what's in the HTML. If you have Dreamweaver template regions, you can also do that. Switch over to there, enter the name of the region, and it will find that. And then I've got a bunch of other options that are really similar to the other importers that you've seen. Do you want to import the linked images? Do you want to import linked documents? We had Word files, PDF files, Excel files, as you do, because we're higher ed. And so I told it which files I wanted it to accept, and it scoops those up into the media library. Once everything is imported, do I want to update internal links so that my links to the old HTML pages will now point to the WordPress pages? Yes, I do. Do we have meta descriptions that we want to use as the excerpt? If we have been following our state accessibility and compliance guidelines, we have unique meta descriptions in all of those HTML files. Let's not waste that data. Let's scoop it up and use it as the excerpt. And then the special feature of this plugin is based on an old tool called WordOff, which is really useful for stripping bad HTML out of Word or FrontPage generated files. So you put in all the tags that you're going to allow. You whitelist them. And if you have data tables, you're going to need to add the standard table tags. But if you don't have data tables, and you're coming from a table-based layout, you can just leave out the table tags and it will strip all that junk out. And then you put in your allowed attributes. And if you don't put in things like target, and all of your users have been like opening links in new windows and you don't want them to be doing that, you can strip that out just in one step here. This will also get rid of any extraneous JavaScript that was attached in line, all those fun things. So you'll get very clean HTML on your way out. You can set the title the same way that you set the content area. And then if there is a common phrase that's in your HTML files, like the name of your institution, dash whatever the page title actually is, you put that name of the institution dash in this field and it'll strip it out so that what's left is the unique page title that you want in WordPress for that file. You can also say, hey, the title is actually located inside that div that I selected for the content. So grab the title and then pull that out and don't duplicate it in the post body. And you can import files as your custom post types, but you have to pick one here. There's no logic that says, you know, look for a certain field and use that to determine what post type it is. Just import them all as one, and then we'll fix it later, and I'll show you how. It also has support for custom fields. Same way, choose your selector and choose what field name it's going to go into, and choose whether HTML should be included or should be stripped out. If you allow HTML, it's going to follow the same rules that were on the content page for what tags and attributes are allowed. You can set categories and tags for everything that comes in. This will apply it to absolutely every file. If you don't want to do that, if you want to select certain things, I have an easier way to do it after things are imported, and I'll show you that. And when you're ready to go, you say, okay, I want to do the whole directory that I specified, or I just want to do a single file and upload it and test it. And you submit, and you get this. And if you're doing hundreds and hundreds of pages, it's going to take a few minutes to turn through all of that. And it will give you pseudo htaccess redirects. I think that most of the time, this path is not going to be exactly what you need, but you can do an easy search and replace to fix that. Or there's other ways that you can redirect after you get through this process, and I'll show you that as well. But if you want to just dump all that into your htaccess file, it will give you the stuff that you need to do that. If WPL import is not quite what you need, and HTML import does not quite do what you need, you can write your own importer if you have a little bit of programming experience, and it's actually not that scary. What I recommend doing is going to that Tools import page, downloading the WordPress importer, and 2 or 3 of the other ones. Take a look at Blogger, Movable Type, whatever it has on that screen. Look at the code and compare, see what they do. They're really similar. All of them fetch data from someplace, and their functions for doing that will be wildly different depending on what they're doing. Blogger is going to actually authenticate with the Google API and pull stuff in that way. Movable Type, I think, is going to ask you to upload a file. WordPress is going to ask you to upload a file. So how they do that first step is different, and you have to customize that for your needs. But then it's going to do the same process. It's going to loop through each item somehow. If it's XML, it's going to pull out XML. If it's files like HTML import, it's going to go through the directory and actually read the file. Once it has each item, it's going to loop through and assemble all the pieces of that post into an array. And then once it has the array, it's going to call insert post to get it into the database. That's going to return the ID of the new post in WordPress. With that ID in hand, you can then set the post terms, the categories, tags, and custom taxonomy terms, and you can add custom fields, add post meta. It's the same steps for every importer. It's just that they do things differently depending on what data is coming in. So you can write your own with very, very simple steps. This is looping through each of the things that we have grabbed from someplace else. We're going to set up an empty post array, and we're going to assign whatever the content is to the post content field, the post status field, the post title field, and then insert our post. It's super simple. Once you have decided how you're going to get stuff in there, you probably need a nap. I always feel like I need a nap. But this is the easy part, actually. So, setting up the WordPress site, where everything's going to be coming into, you want to set up your content model first, so that you have all of your custom post types, taxonomies, and custom fields in place before you try to import. I recommend including fields for the old post ID from whatever CMS you're coming from. We came from Drupal, we imported the NID. The path, however you get that, HTML import will actually give you the full old URL based on the paths that you input in the beginning. Drupal, we exported the actual path field, and that's going to be useful for redirecting later on. So import that if you can. And then when you're importing the author, assuming that you're keeping all of the users that you're bringing into the new system, bring in their ID, their email, their username, anything that's specific that you can use to match them up once they come in as WordPress users later. I recommend generate WP if you don't want to write a whole lot of code over and over again to create your custom taxonomies and custom post types. You can also use the custom post type UI plugin. Not my favorite method. And then I recommend advanced custom fields for creating custom fields because it's just so easy. It's beautiful. So get all of this stuff set up before you import. And then set up your export over on the other side. Like I said, coming from Drupal, you want to go through each of those export fields and say, you know, normally when you export an author, for example, it exports the link to the author archive as well as the actual username. So you have to go in and say, no, plain text only, please. Just give me the username. And there's a whole bunch of fields like that. The date comes through as a link. All of the taxonomies normally are linked to the original Drupal URLs. You have to sit there and play with the export fields and strip out all that stuff that you don't want. And specify, when I export my taxonomies, do I want them separated by comma, semicolon, slash, you know, whatever. We had to be really careful about that because a lot of our taxonomies that we were exporting had commas in the name, and so we had to separate by semicolon, and then set the importer to look for semicolons instead of commas. Specific stuff like that. It's going to be different depending on your data. You're going to have to really know your data that you're exporting, and if you have to work with a data librarian who's more familiar with that, and say, hey, here are the traps that I know about. Commas, special characters, you know, what character set is this old database using? What format is the date stored in? And is it going to match what WordPress is expecting? Or can I set my WordPress importer to accept this format, or do I need to change it on the export side? Character encoding is a big one. I have seen so many databases that were set up using the old Latin character set, because that used to be the MySQL default like 10 years ago. And when you export and then run it through the WordPress importer, it cuts off at the first special character. And so your content will suddenly have like one sentence and then a dash and then nothing. You're like, what just happened? You have to export and encode all those characters as their HTML entities, or do the process of changing your database characters encoding on the old site, which I don't recommend. Just export it as entities and the importers will be fine. And if you have relative link and image paths, if there's anything that you can do on the old site to make those fully qualified URLs, do that. It'll be a lot easier. The HTML importer can handle relative links. Most of the other ones, including WP All Import, are not really good at that. When you're ready to import, you have to stage your servers, give PHP all the memory it wants, ramp it up as much as you can. If you are importing into an existing WordPress site that already has a bunch of plugins and things set up, turn off all the plugins you don't need. And anything, especially that runs on the save post hook, is just going to add time and memory to your import process. And turn off any tools that publicize new posts, like Twitter or Facebook. You really don't want 8,900 posts being sent to Twitter in the space of 4 hours.
Oh, that's fun.
Something Twitter is going to enjoy. And then back up both databases. Even if all you've done on WordPress is set up those that content model with the post types, the taxonomies, and the fields, that's work you don't want to have to duplicate if you need to start over from scratch. Back up both that and whatever you're exporting from, and keep clean copies so that if this all goes badly and blows up in your face, you can just go reset and then start over. And then if you're importing on a live site, warn your system administrator that you're about to do this, because they're going to see a memory spike. And in some cases, if you're pulling from a live site, they're going to see a whole lot of hits from an unfamiliar IP address and go, are we being scanned? Are we being hacked? What's happening? Maybe I just work with extremely paranoid system administrators. Most of them may not even notice that this is happening, but it's polite to warn them that you're about to hit your old server with several thousand requests. When you're all set, you press go. And then you assess the mess. Because no matter how good the importer is, there's going to be some stuff you have to clean up. My favorite suite of plugins for cleaning things up post-import, the search and replace plugin, obviously. There's two that you can use to change post types once they're in WordPress. There's post type switcher, and then one that I wrote called convert post types. And either or both is good. Post type switcher is great if you want to use the bulk edit function on your page list screens and choose one at a time to switch. Convert post types I wrote because I was importing a lot of sites where we'd have sections of things. And so like every page that was under a particular parent page needed to become a different post type. And you can do that sort of bulk thing with convert. You can say all posts that are in this category are now going to become this custom post type and should also have this new taxonomy term added to them. You can do similar things with post type switcher, but it's a little bit more piecemeal. It's like one by one. I like using both actually, because I inevitably find that even if I can use convert post types on most of the stuff, there's like 1 or 2, 4 things that I need to use post type switcher to catch. Term management tools is outstanding for migrating things. I love this plugin because what it does is it gives you extra bulk edit capabilities on your categories, tags, and taxonomy terms. And so if you imported a bunch of stuff from your old site into categories or tags, you probably are going to find that whoever was maintaining that old site was not particularly great about their data entry, and they probably had a bunch of duplicates or things that were similar somehow. What term management tools allows you to do is merge those duplicates into one new tag or category or term. You can also just rename them really easily without having to go to each individual edit screen. It's just beautiful. It's really, really useful too for converting things that didn't used to be taxonomies into categories, tags, or taxonomy terms. I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. Add linked images to gallery does what it says on the tin. If it has an image tag that points somewhere other than your media library, it will find that image and import it into the media library. It works only on posts. If you want it to work on pages or a custom post type, you have to go in and edit the actual plugin file and find the little bracket post and change that. It's goofy. I don't know why it doesn't just look for everything. But I haven't found another plugin that does the same thing as cleanly as this one does, and yet accepts all post types. So I just live with this one and go edit the post type appropriately. For reviewing everything that you have just brought in, admin columns is great because it lets you add new columns to your edit list screens. And so, like for this import, we had things like the source name that was imported as a custom field, and we needed to check that for these publications and make sure that that came through with special characters and whatnot. And we also wanted a column, and I wrote this one by hand, but I think you could do something similar in admin columns. We had the Drupal ID, and we linked that to our old, like the copy of our site that's on a different server, so that we could immediately from that column go check the old copy of the post and then edit this one and make sure, like side by side, did we get all the data? Did all the fields go in the right place? Do they look the same? So for reviewing everything after you've imported it, admin columns is fantastic. And then the last thing that I recommend is another plugin that I wrote called Content Audit. And if you didn't do a big content inventory before you exported from your old site, you can easily do one in WordPress after you've imported. This will let you mark pages as outdated, redundant. It will let you assign them to somebody for review. And I think somebody told me earlier this weekend that the email notifications aren't working as intended, but we'll work with that and get it fixed. So one of the things that we had to clean up on the Drupal site that I did most recently was that we had a bunch of custom fields, things like publisher name for publications, manufacturer name for pieces of equipment, that were listed as plain text fields in Drupal, and nobody was really keeping track of the data entry. And so we had a lot of things where there was like company name, comma, LLC, and company name, no comma, no LLC, or company some abbreviation name. And those were all the same. And what we needed to do was really turn that into a taxonomy so that we had a list that people could choose from or type ahead and get a suggestion. But we had to move from custom fields to taxonomies, and I didn't really want to write a script to do that when I had WP All Import already installed. So what I did is I grabbed the WP All Export companion plugin, exported out of my newly set up WordPress site the custom field that we brought in, and then ran it through WP All Import again and brought it in as a taxonomy term. And then I used term management tools to go through and pick out those duplicates and merge them into one term. Does that make sense? Yeah.
You did this in like an intermediary site.
Before we launched the WordPress site, like after
So
we've
like
imported,
duplicates of everything.
huh?
'Cause if you export it out of the site and then import it back in, you just duplicate.
We have duplicates, yes. So then you have to go through and delete your custom fields. Yeah, but that's easy. And actually, we wanted them side by side too for a little while so that we could do that comparison. Do they look the same? So yeah, before we launched, we did this. I showed you that. And then the last thing, once you have all your data all beautiful, you're going to want to redirect users from those old URLs to the new ones. And there's 3-4 different ways you can do this. There's the htaccess files, of course. That's probably the slowest method. It's going to slow down your server if you have a lot of redirect rules. And it's going to be a pain for you to have to like maintain that text list of all of those things. There are different redirection plugins. There's one called Redirection. There's one called WP Safe Redirect. All of those are good. Or you can actually write a little code of your own. And this is great if you have that ID or that old path stored somewhere. Because like, this is the HTML import screen. You can get those redirects, but these new paths and these old paths are already being stored. And so we can just do a quick get post to find that key that we stored it as, and then redirect to the permalink. And this is a redirect canonical hook that runs on WordPress as it's figuring out which page to direct you to based on what URL you've requested. And so we're checking if it's gotten all the way to the 404, if it didn't match any existing post, page, taxonomy term, whatever, and it's about to redirect you to the not found page. Let's check this first and see if a post exists that has this old URL stored, and if so, send it over there. For the Drupal site, it looked almost identical, except that the URL was stored as a partial path and not the full URL. So we just run it through the PHP parse URL function to get the piece that we need, and then match that to the Drupal path key. That's it. Both of my books include a chapter on importing because I wrote a chapter for WordPress for web developers and then included it in content strategy for WordPress as the sample chapter. So either way, if you are a developer and this book appeals to you, go for it. If you are more of a drag and drop advanced custom fields type person, this book will show you how to get all of that content modeling stuff set up, and it includes the chapter from the other book. Questions? Horror stories?
Bum, 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 bum.
Yes?
Can you just repeat the name of the Drupal exporter plugin?
The Drupal export plugin, I believe it is View Data Export Module.
Thank you.
It's a View plugin, and it's called Data Export. Yes?
Now, going from Drupal to WordPress, how do you migrate the theme? Can you migrate the theme? Is there...
No, you can't migrate the theme easily. You're going to have to rebuild it as a WordPress theme. If you're starting with Drupal files, it might not be too difficult. There's a if you're not familiar too much with WordPress theming, there's a great tutorial called the Theme Shaper theme tutorial.
Yeah.
You can start with your Drupal theme and kind of bring it through those steps to get it converted into a WordPress theme. There's no easy way to do that.
Suggestions on the other way around. Let's say I'm not familiar with Drupal, and I have a Drupal site that I need to convert to WordPress.
Anybody in the crowd have a suggestion for that? On learning Drupal theming as a WordPress person?
Don't.
Don't. That's my suggestion. Honestly, what I would do at that point is take maybe save as HTML of a single page and pick through and figure out, okay, that's a block. I'm going to rip that out and replace it with a widget.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my data. I'm going to rip that out and replace it with a loop.
Yeah.
I don't know Drupal theming either.
Add lots of divs.
Lots of divs, yes. We're going to just remove all those divs. And actually, a lot of it is going to be like surrounding divs, a ton of stuff for your menus, and you can just rip all of that out and get yourself kind of a clean, thing to work with and put in comments. Here's my navigation, here's my widget for whatever, and that'll give you, not too bad a starting point. I've done that. Other questions? We still have about 10 minutes if you want to talk other horror stories or ask about other import processes. I ran through that really fast. No? Thank you very much. Go have a seat.